let's start with me saying that I'm bitterly disappointed. I just don't see the point of this project if they've streamlined it to sort of appeal to a younger market and, this is all Disney and it's all about the dollars. I don't know that it's going to be successful in that regard anyway, because I still think it's for the nerds. And while the tightening job that's been done is fine in and of itself, I think the decision to tighten it up is the problem. And I got to tell you that once I got to episode 9, which I've been waiting for this for 30 years, and I realized, a few minutes in that this was going to be mostly padding, and it was, because I just didn't see the point in having a kind of rehash of the series that we've just watched. And when we get to the actual footage of the 94 and 95 sessions, it's fantastic, but it's just not nearly enough. It's like a teaser.
I don't disagree with you. I'm a little less exercised about it than you are. Although, having said that, I pretty much agree with everything you said. I agree that it didn't need to be tightened up. In fact, to me, if you're going to revise an existing Beatles documentary, it makes more sense to put more in, not take stuff out. Because when it comes to the Beatles, less is definitely not more, ever.
Right.
So, that just is a rule of thumb. And in episode 9, there was a lot of rehashing of what was in the first 8. And although I've read interviews with Oliver Murray, the director of this version, saying, well, now we get to hear what the Beatles felt about being Beatles in episode 9, which they hadn't done before. Well, the thing is, they had done it. They had done it in the first 8 episodes. We have George saying the classic thing he says, they gave us their money and, with all that, and we gave our nervous systems. That pretty much sums up what they felt like about being Beatles, it's...
where they're talking about how it feels to be the Beatles and they're talking about the Anthology project. That, of course, all came from the EPKs, the electronic press kits that were issued in, back 95, 96.
Right.
And those of us in the press certainly got to see, and I'm guessing most of the fans have got to see online by now.
Yeah.
So there was very little new in there.
Yeah, the EPKs are out there on collecting sites for anybody who wants them, and if you want them physically, you can find them on eBay. They're not secret. And also there was the disc 5 of the DVD set with all of the extras and bonuses. And there have been Making of Real Love and Making of Free as a Bird documentaries, and the other thing is that they say that they sort of cut down on the live performance stuff throughout the series in order to focus more on the studio albums. But actually, since there isn't an awful lot of studio footage of them, a lot of what there is already was in the show. And what they added, in a lot of cases, came from those little documentaries that came out in 2009 with each of the albums when they went up on iTunes. There was the making of each album, little documentary with George Martin and lots of footage. And a lot of that footage ended up in here now, too. So, we haven't got an awful lot of new stuff, it seems to me. It's certainly not a lot of stuff I look at and say, wow, I've never seen that before.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to be the odd man out here.
Oh, and,
right. So reviewing the Anthology series isn't easy because I don't believe it was meant for us. It's meant for 2025 and forward. It's not meant to go 2025 and back. It's for future generations, 10, 20, 30 years from now, and have an easy, accessible way to view the history of the band without all of the, with the fat trimmed off, I guess. And I guess that's what we've been getting all along with these remixes. It's a forward-thinking thing. And some of these things you guys are talking about, yeah, it's for collectors, and yeah, it's available here. And if you bootleg this and you see this on YouTube and it gets taken down and then the Beatles get wind of it. But once again, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's so much that I'd love to see, but this doesn't click the boxes for me because I don't necessarily care about some little footage that has been restored, or they've gone in and they've cleaned up the audio, because once I've seen Shea Stadium, like, in all of its various forms. I actually saw it when I was a kid. I remember very plainly seeing it, and it's just like there's no staying power for that for me, even if it's cleaned up, because the songs, the audio is horrible, even though they redid it, most of it. And so it's a hard thing for us to talk about, because we're talking in terms of our generation and what we expect from them. And I just don't think they're thinking that way anymore. And I don't know whether we should respect that or not, or expect more from them. But that's sort of my feelings about this whole thing and why it's out now.
But also the trimming is only like 10 to 15 minutes per episode. So why even bother? It's not like, those with short attention spans, this is going to appease them. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference. But if we look at like just episode 1, for instance, these are things that came to, that I noticed without kind of A-Bing, but just from memory. The things that have gone missing are, there's no George saying that he always knew they were going to make it, which I thought was a fundamental statement, right? That, it wasn't a case of if, but when, that self-belief.
Right.
No talking about Long John and, the stage names that they had in Scotland. That's gone. No Paul recalling how everything gelled the first time they played with Ringo on stage in Hamburg. No story about Pete and Paul going to jail for setting light to the condom. No, I don't like your tie comment from George, the first time they were with George Martin. No mention that it was George Martin's idea to speed up Please Please Me. And, I just don't get why to trim it in that way, because some of those things to me are a fundamental part of the story that I would like future generations to be aware of. And that continues through all of the episodes.
But, a lot of those stories are available elsewhere anyway. You could have like 3-hour episodes and still not have every detail that has been mentioned anywhere. The story of George Martin wanting to speed up Please Please Me, like, that's a pretty standard story, and you can get it in a number of sources. And, I get that this is the entry point now for younger listeners, but if it does its job and gets them interested in the Beatles and wanting to know more, the next place they'll find about George Martin wanting Please Please Me faster, or some of these other things.
But something else that they've done here, and I get it, as an editing tool, it's well done, which is where instead of having the headshots of the Beatles in 94 and 95 talking all the time, and then cutting to what they're talking about, often they're using that material now as just voiceover. But, for example, the part where Paul says that, I was 9 months older than George, and George then says he's still 9 months older than me. In the original, it cuts between them. And you have sort of, George talking, then Paul giving his perspective, and then back to George with a wry grin on his face. We lose all of those visuals here. We just hear it. And it's just a pity. Yeah, I mean, again, what people don't know, they won't miss. But it's just a pity, and I don't get that.
It's almost like the people who want to know that stuff already know it. And the people that don't are younger people who are just discovering the Beatles. And yeah, I mean, we can sit here and we can say that it was the editing of these small things, but they are, when you're looking at it from fresh eyes and you're looking at it as a millennial, I mean, as a Gen Zer or somebody from high school who's, getting into the Beatles. And, my grandparents loved the Beatles probably at this point, they would be saying. those little things, they're important to us, but I don't know in the long term. If you look forward instead of looking back, it's questionable how much of this stuff really makes that big of a difference. And Alan's right. I mean, the next step is they're going to start buying books, and who knows if they're going to get into, like, the heavy books that we get into with all of the details of their childhood and all these type of things. I mean, the bottom line is like one of the best documentaries was the Complete Beatles with Malcolm McDowell that was in the early '80s. I mean, that kind of like is a great encapsulation of everything in 2 hours. So I think that everybody who wants to know all these little details probably already knows them. Those who, at this point want to move on to another thing, they're going to go to YouTube, they're going to go to books, they're going to go into, start chatting with their friends, and they're going to start collecting, and hopefully they go down that path.
But do you find it still insignificant detail that they don't mention actually Stuart's death? He just basically gets replaced, but never talk about his death. There's no Apple boutique opening that I saw, and no John and George drug busts in '68.
I mean, I agree that all of those things are important and should have been mentioned in there, but I'm really sort of looking at an overview of this as opposed to little things because, I mean, these little things should have been mentioned, but if you're looking at it through fresh eyes, they don't even know. They don't know about the Apple boutique, and I don't know if they care.
What do you guys feel about the upscaling of the visuals? Because, again, I'm hearing people going, oh my God, everything looks magnificent. I'm not so sure about that. For me, a lot of like the promos and some of the early archival footage in black and white, it looks too smoothed out to me and too high contrast.
Yeah, they have a tendency of doing that. The AI and cleaning up video goes too far a lot of times. But the thing is, for me, once again, it's like seeing 3 seconds of cleaned up footage or seeing half of a song. It's like I want to see the whole thing. I want to see like all of the, whatever they have. For me, seeing like little sections of cleaned up Shea Stadium, yeah, great. I mean, it looks great, but, let's see all of Shea Stadium. Let's see all of this stuff cleaned up. That's the next thing that they need to do.
I thought generally speaking, it looked really good. Where you could tell that, that kind of waxy effect that people complain about is if you hit pause.
Right.
Then suddenly the faces look a little bit weird. You can see as if it's like between two types of image. But I don't really watch it on pause, so I mean, to me, Shea Stadium looked quite good, maybe a little bit over bright in a way. I mean, I was looking at it again last night, and I was saying, well, I don't know, was the grass in Shea Stadium that bright green? I don't really know, but I'm not really that worried about the grass. I mean, I've seen so many sort of faded copies of the Shea Stadium film over the years. I got a copy that someone managed to spirit out of ABC TV, right off their copy of the film, and it didn't look as the browns were a little bit weird, and it needed color correction, and this may have color corrected a little too much, but it still looks better than what I'm used to seeing. Yeah. Some of the promos look great, I thought.
The promos look good to me on my laptop. They didn't look so good up on the big screen like on the big TV. That's where they looked smoothed out, and the contrast looked like it was overdone. The faces looked a little bit bleached out.
Yeah, that could be. I didn't really notice that on the. I went back and forth between TV and computer monitor too. The thing is, on the computer monitor, it's right close to you. It's like 2 feet from your face, but when you're watching it on the big screen TV, it's across the room. So I didn't really notice it watching it across the room as being problematic. It still looks pretty good to me.
Yeah.
I mean, the size of the screen is huge.
The thing is, it looks like AI isn't totally ready for prime time in terms of cleaning up. It can do a really good job that will satisfy probably most people, but there are those sort of weird artifacts, that waxiness, and I think they put in some artificial grain to try to counteract
Yes, yes, I saw that.
Yeah, it's like when someone was first showing me computer recording, they were in MIDI. They're saying, okay, you can do this. We'll give you an absolute beat, and you can do quantize, which will make everything perfect, and then you can click humanize to introduce little bits of,
screw it up just a little bit.
So adding the artificial grain is a little bit like that. It's adding another artificial thing to clean up the first artificial thing.
Yeah. How do you feel about some of the changes they've made? So for instance, like the end of episode 3, over the end credits, we've now got Things We Said Today instead of the aborted I'll Be Back.
Yeah, I seem to remember being more struck with the end pieces on the original than I was on this. When it first came out, we didn't know any of those outtakes, and now we do. So it's familiar to us, so it's not going to be not as striking. They should have done what they did originally, which is find stuff they haven't put out in any form and include that at the end. That would have been a treat.
Any new things that have been introduced here that you liked, that you noticed and liked?
Well, for me, adding the original version of Yellow Submarine with John singing, in the town where I was born, no one cared. That was a nice touch, because we didn't know that outtake in 1995, and they had said they wanted to increase the focus on the albums. Well, there you go. There's a demo that is completely different from the song we knew, and it gave them an opportunity to talk about how that changed. So, but other than that, I didn't notice too many new things that were surprising in any way.
I was surprised that they didn't this time maybe borrow more from the director's cut that we've had all these years, which has alternate interviews.
Yeah, but the director's cut was really just an early version, so they considered that they had refined it further from the director's cut to the DVDs that we know and love. That said, I agree that there are things in the director's cut that were not in the finished version that I wish they had revisited and put in. For instance, especially since they want to talk about the albums being made, the director's cut had George Martin, in his discussion of A Day in the Life, play the original ending where they tried to sing Om, and it doesn't quite work. Now, we now have that on the Sgt. Pepper box set. We have some of that, so it's out. But when the director's cut came out, it wasn't. And, again, like with putting the Yellow Submarine demo in, they could easily have put that in just to show, how it started out as, that's one idea, and then they ended up with the piano chord. That's the kind of thing I love to see, the development of a piece of music. So, that I thought they should have brought over from the director's cut. But otherwise, I think from their point of view, the director's cut is just, an early version that they've since refined. And now the way they probably look at this is they've refined it even further.
Yeah, I mean, the director's cut, 2 sequences for me that I like, which I didn't expect to go in, are the ones where they're talking about Yoko. There was more of that in the director's cut. And the other thing was George describing the first LSD trip in much more detail in the director's cut. Didn't expect those. It was interesting. I don't know if you noticed that. I read this online. I didn't notice it when I was watching. But they got rid of George talking about slightly gay-looking boys in Hamburg, right? Which you'd think, well, that's a Disney decision. But then we've still got the 2 virgins front cover in there.
Yeah, they also, I think they took out when they're talking about John's dream and, Ringo's so-called Aunt Jessie, where he said, he was shoveling spaghetti onto the plate of the fat woman, and they cut out fat.
Yes. It's been all politically corrected.
Yeah.
That's just 2025, guys. It's like it's okay to show John and Yoko nude, but it's not okay to make reference to somebody, like pigeonholing somebody's being gay or being overweight, or it's maybe Disney, but we can get into what's politically correct and why it should be and why it shouldn't be. But they're just, like I said, they're just making it for the future. And maybe in 20 years from now, 30 years from now, just like there was, but there's going to be a newer anthology after they're all gone.
Yeah.
And that we won't get to see, but maybe there'll be the Get Back version of the anthology where there's going to be 8 hours of just like one DVD, or one episode could be 4 hours long.
Well, how about Peter Jackson doing a deep dive on the anthology recording sessions from 94 and 95? Because, as I said, watching, the clips that they did include were like a teaser to me. And I'd love to see them structuring the songs, and working on them and all of that stuff. There could easily be an hour, documentary on that.
Yeah, that's true. And that's what was so frustrating about all of the recap aspect of episode 9.
Yeah.
The footage from the earlier episodes, and talking about how they felt being Beatles. There was so much stuff they could have used.
Yeah. And my concern now is they feel like now they've dealt with Anthology, that's it. So we're never going to see that stuff. I mean, we've heard about things, right, in terms of like the parts where they're sitting around the table at the studio in the 90s, and it's all very friendly, but we've been told from pretty reliable sources that devolved into sort of rotating arguments between the three, two attacking one and one trying to step in. I didn't expect to see that, but I did expect to see a lot more of the actual recording sessions. And I don't know, maybe we can put pressure on Apple to do something with that. But, that brings me to sort of a wider discussion here about, is it worthwhile what they're doing? Because we loved Get Back, but again, for the mainstream audience, they've done things like 8 Days a Week and Beatles 64, with, I think, varying degrees of success. And I just don't know how much more can be done here. Are we already mining the bottom of the barrel if they're not going to issue some of the gems that they're still sitting on, that maybe they're keeping, as I think, was it you, Allan, who said that this may be their kind of investment for their children and grandchildren to mine in the coming decades?
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're definitely keeping stuff so that, the kids can put things out that haven't been out, and they can always have an income stream. But maybe that's just a too cynical way to look at it. But, I think we said last time when we were talking about Anthology 4, there are all of these video complete concerts. What about those? Why can't we have those? We just get a snippet of Shay, and there's the whole Shay documentary out there. There's Paris, and there's Sweden 63. There's really quite a lot that shows what they could do, before everybody made it impossible for them to really give good performances. I mean, and you could show that too, put out one or both of the Japanese shows, which are not great performances, and maybe they just don't care anymore because they don't think anyone can hear them. Although oddly enough, in Japan, everybody could hear them because that was a very quiet audience.
Yeah, but talking about not caring, do you feel that when it comes down to it, that Paul and Ringo and Olivia and Sean really respect the diehards, or is this just pure money? Because that's what it always feels like to me, okay? It felt like that when George did his I Me Mine book, and it was priced way above the pockets of the average fan, and he was apparently really pissed off when they issued it as a regular hardcover for people. And, there's that story of the first time an Apple tech went to Friar Park to show George the newfangled Beatles.com website, and George's quip was, Why don't they put a coin slot on top of the computer so that people have to pay to visit the website? And it just seems to smack of that all the time, that it's just a naked push for money. I don't feel there's much love for the diehard fans.
The last thing that they really did was get back for the diehard fans. Thinking about the anthology, I started thinking, well, what are we missing? As these fans, what are we missing? You guys are bringing up these things. And yeah, those are the things we're missing. But I wish they would just put out whatever footage they have of them working in the studio. And we assume that there's not much. But all of a sudden, these little things, these little snippets show up. And it's like, wait a minute. I never saw that little footage of them with Jeff Emmerich in 66, 67. It's nice to see all the Hey Bulldog stuff. Yeah, and all that. I would love to see like them just putting out the footage and having it restored video-wise the best they can and just in chronological order. But they keep teasing us with this stuff. I find it very surprising that they wouldn't have some kind of footage other than these early days at EMI or just all the way to Get Back, and so little of it in between. And that's what we're talking about here. We're fighting for, we're talking about these little scraps, saying, well, they did this, and, they left out this little bit. But, if they really wanted to appease the fans, they would just say, okay, here it is. Here's all the stuff. Because the only thing I'm really fascinated in, it's like, we all know the Beatles story. It's like, for starters, I Don't Like Your Tie, and, and all the, we've, even though it wasn't in this, as fans, we've heard this all a million times. So I'm dying for any footage of them doing anything in the studio, even if they're just sitting around on the floor at EMI having tea. I want to see it, or footage of them getting ready for one of their videos, like for Ticket to Ride or We Can Work It Out, or something like that. It would just, whatever they have, just put it in a big long documentary like they did with Get Back, and just say, here you go, diehard fans. This is the stuff that you've been waiting for.
Yeah, we saw snippets of White Album sessions in there, right? And it's like, come on, guys, give us more of that, along with the Threetle stuff.
So it's there because, somebody just wouldn't walk in and just take 5 seconds of a video of them in the control room. Somebody had some kind of video camera, and there's probably more stuff laying around. The stuff with McCartney sitting there, playing Blackbird and Helter Skelter, and that kind of stuff. It's like all that stuff is just clean it up and put it out. Whatever we haven't seen, just chronological order and just let it go.
Yeah, I think they have some weird attitude about fans who are not just casual fans and like the Beatles, who want to really hear all of the process stuff that went into what they did. And the strange thing about that is you hear them say sometimes, what was important to us was the music, not the haircuts and the boots. And, well, yeah, that's us too. We're not that interested in the haircuts and the boots. That's you can deal with in 2 sentences, and there it is, the haircuts and the boots. What we want is the detail on the music, how they, just because what they did was incredible, and we want to know how they got to incredible. It's the same as looking at Beethoven notebooks, where he writes a sort of dippy little phrase and it becomes the Fifth Symphony. This is exactly like that. Well, maybe not exactly, but pretty much like that. And so I would have thought that they would have a little more respect for us because we're interested in what they think is the most important stuff they did. And yet they have this attitude about fans that's like, well, all this stuff is none of your business, and you're just all a bit daft. So I don't know how to deal with that because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, the footage from the 94-95 sessions was absolutely bloody fascinating to see George and Paul on the acoustic guitars and routining it and, figuring out different segments. Yeah. I'd have loved to have got more into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for me, that's like the, when we talk about the validity of this project in general, all the stuff with the three of them, revisiting the tracks and raising lower the faders. I mean, a lot of that stuff we've seen, but there is footage that we haven't seen. And to me, that's worth the price of admission right there. I mean, it's just them working on John's songs. It's like, that's what I want so badly, to see the Beatles in the studio. Any footage of it, just all of it, just put it out there. I mean, we don't necessarily need to see Blue Moon of Kentucky again, and and them playing raunchy and all that. I mean, we know, the history of the songs and why they're important to them and all that, but just want to see it. And I really only focused on episode 9, and them never calling themselves the Beatles. The Beatles were something else. It was a living, breathing thing. It's like them referring to Brian as Mr. Epstein after he died. For me, there was something very touching about the last part of 9, just the way they were removed from it. It's like, when Now and Then came out, I didn't get emotional. I think, most people who know me know that I didn't particularly like it very much. And, some people were very touched by it, and some others were very critical. But as little as that song touched me, the end of Anthology, I think it made up for it, because it really put a button on the end of their career. Just seeing the three of them again, as much as they could put in there, and seeing the camaraderie that we saw, and I'd love to see the arguments too, but just to watch 3 Beatles playing together, and they resisted putting in the current Paul and Ringo. They stayed back in 1995, which was great. They didn't think
I agree.
That would have mucked it up if they would have said, okay, this is the 60s, this is the 90s, and now we've got 2 Beatles in 2025, and here's what they have to say. And it's like, forget it. I don't want to hear what they have to say. There's 2 aspects. It's like you stay in the 60s, and then you jump to the middle of the 90s. And those 2 eras, that's what's important, I think, as far as this anthology goes.
And to be honest, seeing what they have had to say for the video collection and for, was it 8 days a week or so, they had very little to say of worth anyway.
Exactly.
As and when I watch Anthology again, it won't be this version. It will be the original version for me.
I think so too.
Yeah, probably. These things I've mentioned in previous podcasts, they have less staying power. I mean, I tend to listen to bootlegs once or twice and tend to forget them. There's a couple of bootlegs that, I really, really love, like on Anthology 2. I love the rawness of Good Morning, Good Morning, the basic tracks. I mean, to me, that shows them as a really great rock band. Just how great that sounds without the bass, and it's a revelation, because I never knew those were the chords that John was playing in that song, because they're buried by the horn section, and the horn section gives the way Paul is doing the walk down on the bass and the way the horns are playing, you'd never know those were the chords. So those type of things I tend to visit a bit more, but I don't care necessarily about the Got to Get You in My Life with the all those type of things. They're important to hear, but I'll just listen to the album. And probably listen to, the original albums much more.
Allan, you're the biggest collector out of the 3 of us. How do you feel about it overall, audio and the video?
I think you said at the beginning you weren't sure what the point of it was, and I'm not totally sure what the point is either. The anthology was a very 1990s product in a way. We talked, I think, last time about Frankensteining tracks and all that, which they don't really do very much anymore in the deluxe editions of the albums. I think that kind of went out of style, trying to make a finished track out of unfinished tracks. It's like, what's the point? So I didn't really see a lot of point in reviving the anthology. They're there. Okay, maybe they sound a little better in some cases, and I guess that's good. And the visual one, well, okay, we've got the original TV one was like 6 hours minus commercials. So that's a lot shorter than this.
Yeah.
Right.
Before that, we have the director's cut. So we've got that version. We've got the TV version, which most of us have on tape. Some of us have on DVD. Then we have, I guess, this version. And this version, I mean, it's tighter, I suppose. But, in cutting only 50, as you said, only 15 minutes per episode, well, there are 8 episodes. That's 2 hours they've cut out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I see, I was talking about it from the perspective of per episode, right? If we're going to assume that the general public are not going to binge watch like we do, just watch the whole bloody lot in one go, right? So reducing by 10, 15 minutes isn't a big deal. Like you say, when you add it all up, then it is a big deal.
Yeah. I wasn't that put out by the AI upscaling. I thought mostly it looked better than the original Anthology did because, I pulled out some of the discs just to look at them in the last couple of days, and they were a little bit fuzzier on the DVD even. So it's nice that the quality's improved, and in some cases they've actually used better sources, better sources that have come to light for certain things. The Royal Command Twist and Shout was one. They used Peter Jackson's audio of the Hamburg stuff, which, as we know, he has the lowest generation copy of that tape. So it was good to hear that as well as you can hear it. So, I like those improvements, but I also like the longer version. I found it I actually found the longer version more moving in a way at the very end when they finally break up.
Well, we don't have Ringo here saying about that on Abbey Road, recording the end. We never intended or thought that this was going to be the last take, the last thing that we ever do. They took that out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think that might have helped as just a sort of an emotional thing, because I remember on the original DVD coming to the end of it and, just seeing the footage of them in August on that final photo shoot out in the field. That it was just really kind of devastating in a way, even though, you know the story. It's been decades since it happened. And then I watched that episode 8, yesterday, and got to that point and just didn't really feel it. It just was sort of like an intellectual, oh, yes, and this is when they break up. It was sort of clinical. Yeah.
So if you had to sum up your feeling about the documentary series now, the revised one, and you had to sum it up in just a few words, what is your reaction to it?
It's not meant for the diehard collector. It's meant for people that want to go forward with it, and in that instance, it's good.
Yeah, I agree with Craig. I mean, it isn't for us, and I think it still requires of the non-diehard collectors a significant investment of time. I mean, it's 9 hours, but I do prefer the longer original because that was more for us than this is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was expecting it to be for us. And, I'd heard stories about, they've recut the entire documentary series. It's going to have extra stuff in it. So I was disappointed with that. And I have to say, I was royally pissed off with episode 9. When I realized where it was going, with all that sort of padding and rehashing and the EPK stuff, and I could see that we were dragging our heels to even get to Free as a Bird. I just felt really pissed off.
I mean, a lot of it felt like it was an hour-long trailer
for
a movie.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. And unnecessary. They could have done a lot more with it. They put a lot of work into it. It's beautifully put together. But again, it's the decision-making.
But see, that's the thing, because the decision-making is... I mean, I know a number of people who couldn't sit through Get Back, like that. Yeah, my wife fell asleep. She was like, okay, I mean, how many times do I have to listen to them doing I Dig a Pony, or two of us? I mean, after the 20th or 30th time of them doing it, it's just like, okay, and I feel that way about the music, but I love the movie Get Back, and I've probably watched the whole documentary Get Back more than I've listened to Anthology 1 over the years. I mean, Anthology 1, it's cute. I've heard Ain't She Sweet and all that stuff a million times, but it's like, for me, seeing them is everything. And I never forget that people will fall asleep during a thing like Get Back.
Get Back was long, and I could have sat through quite a lot more of it. But here's the thing. With Get Back, those of us who have been collecting the stuff on bootlegs have heard all those sessions. But the visual aspect of Get Back added a whole lot more information than we were getting simply from the audio recordings. We could see their expressions. We could see, when they were joking and when they were serious, and, how they were approaching all this stuff. With Anthology, I don't think I got any new information, to tell you the truth.
I agree.
But the other thing, too, about Get Back, listening to the bootlegs, which for me, all these years have been pointless, but the fact that we do have the visual and the fact that they cleaned up the audio so much, the Nagra tapes, you're struggling to hear what they're talking about. You turn it up and it's just like, I think George said this, and the fact that, they went in and they cleaned up and, and you can actually hear that conversation between Paul and John at the in the canteen talking about George is very moving, and in those type of things on a bootleg they don't translate because they didn't have the technology to separate them as much as they did. So it's the combination of the two. Yeah. We're connoisseurs looking at this as like a fine wine and going, well, this year was a little disappointing, and there's a lot of people just saying, yeah, I don't care if it's Pinot, it's Cab, it's whatever, just give me whatever you got.
Well, I do think that one of the most ignored minorities in this country are the Beatles connoisseurs.
Thank you. That's a good way to end this podcast, Richard. Speak up for the little man.
Buskin with the Beatles. Theme song composed and performed by Craig Bartock and Gary Stoner. And music by Craig Bartock.